I want to talk about how one sees problems with participial phrases that are standing outside of the main clause, when they're separated by a comma from the main clause, because there's a set of problems that can occur when the participles don't modify the right thing. So I want to give you a kind of test for checking that and maybe see how you would go about correcting sentences with this kind of problem in them. So let's start out with a sentence that works. Seen from a distance, New York looks great. So here is a participial phrase, seen from a distance, that is separated by a comma from the main clause being New York looks great. And now in this video we're looking at participial phrases that begin with a past participle, like seen. Okay, because the test here that you could use to see if everything is working correctly, you could take the subject of the main clause and then add to that the passive voice form of the participle, in this case seen, and if you turn that participle into a verb, into a passive voice verb, and you can see if the sentence is working correctly. So the subject is New York. New York looks. So this is the subject-verb combination in this sentence as it stands. New York looks. New York is the subject. So we put New York here in our test sentence, and then the passive voice form of the participle. So the participle is seen, and if we turn that into the passive voice, we get is seen. Something is seen. So we get New York in our test sentence. We get New York is seen from a distance. So seen from a distance is our participial phrase beginning with a past participle. And to test that, we can put New York as the subject of a test sentence and then add the passive voice form of whatever the past participle is. So we get New York is seen from a distance. And is that what the sentence is is that part of what the sentence is saying? And indeed it is. Seen from a distance, New York looks great. So remember that participial phrases separated by a comma from the main clause, they always modify the subject of the main clause. And that's why we can use the subject in a test sentence to see if the participial phrase is actually modifying what it's supposed to be modifying, namely the subject. So New York is seen from a distance. That would be our test sentence to show that seen from a distance, New York looks great is a good sentence. It is correct. So now let's look at this sentence here. Based on false reports, the suspect was arrested. Well, our test would be, what would our test be here? So the subject of the main clause is the suspect. So we write the suspect. And now the participial phrase here, based on false reports, based, of course, is the past participle. So if we were to turn that into a passive voice verb, we would get the suspect is based, and we go on false reports. The suspect is based on false reports. Well, people, even suspects, can't be based on any kind of report. A person cannot be based on a report. So this doesn't work. Now, I picked this particular one based on because it's so widespread and indeed in time it may become correct, but I wouldn't say it's correct right now. What is wanted here is something more like on the basis of false reports. That is something that's adverbial, a prepositional phrase. On the basis of false reports, the suspect was arrested. How was he arrested? On the basis of false reports. That's how. I mean, that's an adverbial function, and that's what prepositional phrases do. Based on false reports is clearly a participial phrase But it's also clearly in this sentence supposed to function as an adverb. How was he arrested? Based on false reports. That's how. Well, to my ear, that just sounds completely incorrect, because based on false reports is a participial phrase, and participial phrases are never adverbial. They are always adjectival. So this, in my playbook, this sentence is absolutely not something that works, and we can see that with our little test. So let's look at this one. Now, here is a participial phrase that actually doesn't begin with a participle. It begins with an adverb. It's a very short participial phrase. Universally revered, Sandor's acclaim thrills millions. Now, we see here the same thing. If we do our little test here, the subject is Sandor's acclaim. So I'll put S's. Say from S's acclaim. S's acclaim. Now here's our participial phrase. I can just put is revered. I mean, it'd be fine to put universally if I'll put it up here. I'm running out of room here. So now what we get in our test sentence is Sandor's acclaim is universally revered. Well, that's obviously not what the intention of this speaker is. It's Sandor himself who is universally revered, not his acclaim. You can't revere you can't revere somebody's acclaim. You revere the person. So here, there's been an unintentional meaning here, namely that that Sandor's acclaim is universally revered, whereas the speaker certainly wanted to say that Sandor himself is universally revered. So it should be something like universally revered, Sandor has achieved a status that thrills millions, or something, or Sandor has achieved acclaim that thrills millions, or something like that. But it has to be Sandor, because then we'd get Sandor is universally revered rather than Sandor's acclaim is universally revered. So these are common problems with participial phrases that stand outside of the main clause, that are separated from the main clause, set off by commas or by a comma. And if that participial phrase is one that contains a past participle, then again this test is the subject of the main clause, because that's what the participial phrase modifies. Whether you want it to or not, that's what the participial phrase modifies. Subject plus the passive voice form of that participle will yield a test sentence that will tell you whether the participial phrase is modifying the thing you want it to modify.